Wait, do you want the polite answer or the honest answer?
You know what? You can be as honest as you want. There are no lies between us. How about that?
That is true. I'm doing fine generally. But I did just come out of like 2 days of conferencing. It's like a startup conference type barbecue. Anyway, that's what I was. And it really saps my energy. So I'm looking forward to like sleeping for 2 weeks now, which I will not be able to do, which is very sad. But apart from that, I'm generally doing fine. Autumn is here. Autumn just arrived this week.
It's here.
Like this.
It's
It
like
was just
that.
like a hard cut. It was a hard cut. It was on Sunday, it was summer, and on Monday, it was autumn. And I was like, what's happening? So yeah,
It was like
anyway.
you were done. We finished this whole
Yeah,
summer thing.
yep,
It expired.
yep.
Yeah.
It's a whole
So,
whiplash, and I'm feeling it mentally and emotionally too a little bit. But yeah, other than that, I'm chugging along.
I
How are
have
you?
I have to say I'm feeling a little bad now because like I feel like I'm disturbing your hibernation at this point. And like you were
No,
going to go into
no.
hibernation mode, and now I'm keeping you out of this and
This
everything.
this is part of my hibernation. This is part of my recharging. So don't worry about that.
Oh, look at that! I get to put you to sleep. That's something. Well, that wasn't exactly the goal of this, but we'll make it work. We'll make it work. For anybody who's just popping in, this is Emil. Emil, he's like one of the most remarkable, awesome people that I know working at DEI. You're in Copenhagen. This is right. This is where I ran into you. And you are. I love that you combine a lot of things. You combine not just the DEI and organizational development and trying to get people to build better companies and such, but you also are an artist, you're a storyteller, you're an educator, you're a researcher. You have more slashes than a tire. This is great. So thank you for sharing your time and for being in my day and for bringing the joy on the gray kind of autumn days that we have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And also thank you for sharing your time with me. It's like I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But how are you? Because you didn't answer that one.
Oh, I didn't. Today I am tired. I'm not gonna lie. I'm
Um,
actually, yeah. I got a small kid. I got a small person,
yeah.
and small people they have this thing about like taking time, because I mean it's this fictitious concept anyway. This whole thing about time and hours and schedules and all that kind of stuff, right? But this person, yes, she requires a lot of it sometimes, and last night was one of those ones where she did. So,
Mm,
yes, if you see the bags under my eyes, I'm not packing for a trip. It is just kind of what it is, and I appreciate when I get to talk to people who give energy, and that makes my day so much better. So, thank you very much.
nice, nice. I'm
Yeah.
so happy about that.
Mm.
Thank you.
But you, okay, I have to ask a massive question that's been burning like in my mind since we are trying to
Mm-hmm.
arrange this one. You somehow you said that you were nervous and self-conscious. I'm going to bring that up. You said you were nervous and self-conscious to have a chat with me. And I hate to make people feel, nervous and self-conscious. Is it a me thing? Is it a conversation? What's the thing? Tell me so I can make
It's
it
not a
better.
you thing. It's not a you thing. It is 100% no, because you know that I love chatting with you. I mean, we've done it before, but this one is, like the framing of this is like, oh, I'm chatting with like these really awesome people. And I'm like, how the hell am I on that list? Because I'm really, that's the part that makes me nervous. And I don't like, oh my gosh, this is, ah, I hate, I don't know. I don't want to come across as like, like falsely modest or whatever, but it's part of actually, okay, so I'm just going to be like really brutally honest about this part because it is part of like having ADHD. Of like the thing is that like people think that ADHD is about, oh, I forgot my keys, oh, I forgot where I put my phones, blah blah blah. Like that's the general mental image for the average person about ADHD. But in reality, a huge part of ADHD is that because of certain chemical imbalances, dopamine, and so on and so forth, what have you, it is very hard for people to register and remember things that we have done, like things that we have
Mm.
completed, and that has been such a huge part of my life. And I was diagnosed late in life with ADHD. I was diagnosed like when I was 29 or 30, right? So it's like relatively recent. And um, and that really just shifted my view of like, oh, this is why that is. So yeah, anyway, so people don't really realize that like for a lot of people with ADHD, we do not actually hold on to the memories of our accomplishments or having achieved anything or having even just finished anything. Like as you said, like I'm also an artist and I do work on comics, for instance, and I catch myself on the daily telling myself like, ah, yeah, you've never finished a comic before. I have a whole portfolio of like finished short comics for anthologies, for whatnot. Like I have at least 3 published comics, 2 in anthologies and 1 self-published by the writer of the comic because I was only the artist for that one. And I have like a handful of like very short like gags, so to speak. And I'm like, and yet every single day I catch myself like I have never done anything. And so that is also very true for my work, where I'm like, oh, but I've never really done anything. And like, yet people come to me and like, oh yeah, I recognize your name. And then, oh yeah, I heard about you from so-and-so. And oh yeah, you're an amazing person. You're doing amazing work. And I'm like, what do you mean? You know, so that's the brutally honest answer to that. That's what makes me self-conscious. And I know that it's an issue, but it's very hard to balance that thing. It's very hard to balance it out. So like for me, it's not about like modesty or whatever. It's not about being humble. It's just literally my brain chemistry is such that I have to write down on a piece of paper. Like I stole an idea from somebody I saw online, and I cannot give credit for this because I already forgot who it was, and I'm very, very sorry. But I'm also pretty sure that a lot of people do this. I literally have a little folder on my Google Drive that is just labeled win bin. And anytime anybody says something nice about my work, like how it helped them or how they appreciated me saying this or that, I take a screenshot and I put it in there. Because I'm like, I do not remember this. Like, I literally will not have a memory of this. But on a rainy day, if I remember that the win bin exists, because that's also an issue sometimes, then I go in there and I read it through and I'm just like, aw, you know?
Yes.
So anyway, that's where that comes from, at least partially.
Okay. Well, good. I'm so happy that you got that, because I was thinking, like, as you're talking, it sounds like your brain is like a liar by omission, but you're like a truth teller in your heart. So it's kind of really funny. Like, I'm like, how is that working out, that relationship between you and the brain? But I think then, yeah, you got that whole, that win bin. I love it. That's a great concept. I'm going to have to take that. I have my running to-do list. And this is something where like I don't erase things once they're done. I kind of just keep it on like the list of all the checked things and such, like the things that I've done. And so it's a nice thing to look back on your day. You're like, man, I didn't get anything done. It's horrible. And you look, actually, I got like these 10 things, you know, maybe didn't get all 20, but like I got 10 things done. And that's
exactly.
Just keep track of the progress. It makes you feel better in the day, you know?
Exactly. Next level thing is like whenever I do something that was not originally on my list, I put it on the list and then I cross it off.
Yo, I do that. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, you know what? I spend so much time with productive procrastination. I love it. So like I am a very productive procrastinator. So I have like things that absolutely need to get done. I have some things that are important but not urgent. You know, I got some things that are like some things I should probably take care of eventually down the road. And if you get stuck on something that is, you know, maybe a big thing that you need to get done, but you just don't have it and you don't have the gas right now, just kind of go down the list. You're like, oh, you know, I do need to also do da 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 da. And then I productively procrastinate. I may not make progress on that one thing initially, but it will get done in time. But like taking care of those other things a little bit by bit, you know, when I should have been working on something else, means that when it turns, you know, the time comes for that to have been the urgent, important thing to look at, it's already half done or completed already. Yep. So it works out in its own dysfunctional way. I love it, you know?
Exactly. You know, the universe and the dysfunctional brain, it has a way. You know, it's okay. Like, trust the process. A lot of it is about trusting the process.
This is true. You know what? And adapting the process to make it work for you, I think that's been a big thing. It has occurred to me that maybe I am not a good like 9-to-5er, you know? And there's a certain point in my life where you just have to kind of accept that, where you're like, well, it's not worth all the discomfort of fitting myself into like a mold that doesn't quite fit, you know?
Yeah.
And can you create more value for yourself and for others by just being who you are and how you are? And that's the thing. I think, I don't know, for me, that's something that I've come to realize. Like, I always will have something that's a bit entrepreneurial in me. I'm always going to have something that is, out of the box in some ways, and that's kind of how it goes,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that so much because I became self-employed last summer, right? And it was the
Mm.
scariest thing I've ever done. But at the same time now, a year in, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't exactly have stability, but I do have the luxury of having a partner who also has a job. It's not paying well by any means, but I do have that sort of luxury, So like we
Yeah.
are two people putting into the household, and we do have again the luxury to be renting quite cheap in Copenhagen, which is an
Yeah.
exceptionally lucky situation, because Copenhagen is an absolute nightmare to be renting in. But we got very lucky there, and I have like these luxuries. So all I'm trying to say is like having become self-employed was extremely scary, but I would not go back, and I hope that I never have to. Like exactly that. It's like I'm making my own mold, and I know that I need that structure, but I can create that structure,
Well, that's the thing. I actually did this weird thing. I'm an analyst in my heart. Like, this is something where I always, like, I will have some numbers behind almost every decision I make, right? And this past, I don't know, like for my birthday in February, I ended up like making a list of all the things that I valued. Like, these are things that are really, really important to me. And from a professional context, these are things that are incredibly important to me. And I was looking at all the things that I do professionally, all the different activities that I do, things that I could do, like the jobs that I've had and that sort of thing. And then I started, scoring these based off of those values and what I need professionally in that sense. And, it occurred to me like, there are certain things that I could do, like that would give me more in my life. And this is why I'm actually
hmm
doing this kind of series where I get to talk to different people and share and communicate. And I'm like,
hmm
that's something that I value. I value connecting with people, and I value sharing an education. And I'm thinking about a way that I can do it that's sustainable and a way that, has residual value in that sense. There's something where you can go back to this again at some point, right? Um,
Yeah.
but I was thinking about working in house. Can that give me what I want? And I realized it could. It actually could. So I'm a person where it can be something that could work if the work is flexible, and if the people add more than what they detract from my
hmm
life.
Yeah.
But when you're in dynamics, work dynamics, where the people might be a little bit toxic in that sense, or if you're not valued for what you put in and that sort of thing, then it's not even worth it for me. But I've definitely looked for in-house roles just because I miss camaraderie sometimes, and that's the
Yeah.
thing where, like, when you work as a freelancer, when you work as an entrepreneur, when you work as somebody who is external, you sometimes don't get to build those long-term relationships with people.
Yeah.
And there's so much growth that you get when you can collaborate. There's so much growth that you can get when you actually do have that, that that companionship professionally.
Yeah.
So I do miss that, which is why I will always kind of look back in house in some ways. But it's a thing where when I realize the in-house thing doesn't give me what I want, I will switch back out externally to refill myself, to make certain that,
hmm
you know, if I can't get it out there, I can always add, what I need to my own life. And I think I love that agency. I love the ability to do that. And I'm so grateful I have that
Yeah.
option for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hear exactly what you're saying, what you're saying there, because, like not halfway, what am I saying? A couple of months into this whole self-employed journey, I started to be like, I really miss being in an office. I really miss being around people. They don't have
Mm-hmm.
to be my friends. Um, so like before my last job, right, I made this decision because I had like a bad experience at a past job, and I was like, I don't need to be friends with my colleagues. It's okay if we are work friends, so to speak. I go to work, we are civil, we are cordial, we are kind to one another, we have honest conversations and stuff, but we don't need to be friends. So I made that decision. Some of my best friends today are literally out of the job that I got after I made that decision. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's the same as when I decided that I don't need to have a romantic partner to be happy. It's fine. And then I met my
Mhm.
partner like 2 months later, and I'm still, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, right?
Oh
And
my
I was just like,
goodness!
why does this happen always like
Hey,
this?
hey. Well, I mean,
Yeah, so
I
it's
think
wonderful.
you take out necessity and then you get the opportunity
Yeah.
of it. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Exactly, exactly. But what that also made me think of is that, like, as a self-employed person within this space, so DEI, I'm increasingly looking at DEI as a tool rather than a general area in which I work. I'm slowly shifting towards like more organizational design, social impact, and the links between the two, because
Mhm.
toxic teams are not going to change the world for the better, period. So,
Mhm.
um, so I'm kind of like shifting more and more towards that, but within this general space, meaning DEI, meaning social impact, meaning a lot of the decolonial space, a lot of just kind of like these transformational things that are happening. A lot of people who I have made connections within that space, including you and including so many other wonderful people. To me, like, it has been such a wonderful, enriching experience that the word competitor doesn't make sense to me anymore, especially in this space. And
Mhm.
so that's what came up while you were also talking about, like, the camaraderie that we do miss as self-employed people. At the same time, am in like I do make sure to. It's not. I'm not making sure anything. It's just happened organically. I see a lot of the people in this space as my colleagues. I don't see them as
Mhm.
competitors.
Yeah.
I see them as my colleagues. I see you as my colleague, right? Like, we're not competitors, even though
No.
we are both researchers within this space and we work
Mhm.
like with vaguely similar things, but we don't really, because we have complementary skill sets. And I have like everybody within this space, we all have complementary skill sets. And the thing is that the issues are so big, so entrenched, so deeply, deeply rooted,
Mhm.
that we need everybody that is able to work on this to be working on this. There is no room for competition. And so for me, when people are like, I want to be the leading DI thought leader, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you make no sense to me. I'm so sorry. This makes zero sense to me, because why do you think, I don't care who you are, but why do you think that you as a single person can be the key to most or all DEI challenges?
Oh
That
my
goes
gosh.
against the grain of DEI, straight up.
Exactly. I always think about this. So when it comes to this notion of inclusion, I'm like, why are you working by yourself in that sense? Like, so for me,
Right?
I always have collaborators that I work with different kind of projects, and so I like to bring them in. And by the way, at some point, we're going to be collaborating on something. We got to work on something, right? And
Put a
it's
pin in
because
that.
but it's this thing because of this research and mindset. You always have triangulation, right? And you want to take look at different things from different perspectives, right? So it's not just the triangulation of data, you also have triangulation of perspective, right? And so
Yeah,
for me, I always want to make certain that I'm bringing in people who have different perspectives than what I have.
yeah,
Otherwise, you can get caught in this whole thing of, just the observer bias. You can get caught this whole thing of just, bringing in your perspective that you think, and that's the one thing, but that's completely against this idea of diversity,
yeah,
and it's a completely
yeah.
against this idea of inclusion. So how do we make certain that we're always bringing in different perspectives, different
Yeah,
viewpoints, and different people to be able to look at these things and be able to solve these problems together? Because
yeah.
you can't solve problems for people without people.
That's the whole thing, right? Like, and that's also so interesting, because when I enter, like, I have a couple of like very, very unpopular things that I ask of, like, founders within social impact spaces, where I'm like, are you really the right person to be tackling this problem? Uh, and that's a very
Mm.
unpopular question. And you know what? In some ways, I do blame the hero's journey sort of Western storytelling tradition. I do, because we all want to be the Luke Skywalkers, right? We all want to be that one hero that saves the day, and there is no such thing. There is no one person who invents a thing. Nobody, not no one person invents a thing. like standing on the shoulders of giants or whatever, that is not just a turn of phrase. And it's not just, you're not just building on knowledge that was accumulated 100 years before you. You are also building on knowledge that is being accumulated actively as you're also working on your own thing. You have to, because otherwise whatever you come up with is just not it's just not relevant in the present moment anymore. So you have to be building on stuff that other people are working on. And if you're building on that competitively, then it's all about stepping over other people, while you don't really notice that you're stepping over people, because we are all so indoctrinated with this whole hero's journey bullcrap, right? Like that it's like, oh, there is the one person who's going to save the day. And yeah, that person does have sidekicks, but it's still, it very much promotes this like weird hierarchy of like, there is the one savior on top. And we have that ingrained in us so deeply, like not just through you know, like the systemic, the structural, the political, the organizational of our society, but our narratives and our stories that come out of this space reflect that mindset. And it doesn't only reflect, it also perpetuates that mindset. And I think that that's this might seem like a massive tangent, but I think that that's also why it's so extremely important to read stories from outside of our own cultural bubble that we grew up in, because suddenly you will just experience other story structures, other storylines, like you will be exposed to things that are completely different from that narrative tradition that you are so deeply entrenched in. And I know that to some people these things might seem extremely far removed, but to me they're like really in overlap. But then again, like I'm the worst of systems thinkers, that I'm like, I cannot tug on one thing without everything else moving with it. So, you know,
I appreciate this. I honestly appreciate this, but I was smiling because I was thinking, I love how you bring in storytelling into so many different things. And this is a great thing. This is perfect. And it also reminded me though of, so we've had very different experiences in our lives and such, but we have very similar kind of interest journeys, I would say. I mean, I think, do we both start off in linguistics and such?
Yep.
I mean, exactly. You know, and so we started off with linguistics, and then we kind of go into research and, you know, DEI, organizational development, and systems thing.
Yep.
So it's kind of funny. And then with the storytelling aspect, I was like, oh, this is, you know, I hear that in there. So I love that you're weaving all of these things throughout what you do. I mean, I'm really curious, is there any one of those strings, those threads in your professional life that you're like, I really wish I could try to, you know, to weave back in there, weave there a bit more often? Because you do so many different things. And I'm wondering, like, is there something where you're like, I wish we could do this more, I could integrate this more to be able to build the solutions I'm looking to help build in the world?
So the thing is that I have a very, very hard time accepting that I am one person with the finite resources of being one person in space
So
and in time.
hard. So hard.
I know what's the deal with that. And so anytime I'm doing something, I miss everything else that I'm not doing at that same time. And so like, if you ask me like any given week, I will give you a different answer to this. But right now, currently, I really wish that I could bring in a bit more of sort of like the visual art style of what I do. But at the same time, like, again, the limitations of being one person within time and space, it makes it really hard. And then again, like, you know, I literally just talked about the whole hero's journey, and like no one person will solve anything. So it's a little bit. So I have to balance that wish of like being able to do everything that I'm interested in, with the other side of that same coin of being the person solving XYZ problem. Like I don't want to accidentally fall over into that. So and to me, the line between those two things is a little bit too thin. So I'm trying my best to just kind of balance that out. But basically, yeah, the drawing part, I wish that I could just draw like little educational comics, and I have actually done that, and I have actually done that for money within my own like self-employed life this year, which was like really wild. I did not expect that to happen. I know, it was awesome. And so like I want to do that, but I will say this: drawing comics is extremely time consuming. It is so time consuming that by the time I'm done with like a project with like a short educational comic or whatever, it might just not be relevant anymore. The same way that it was when I started it. Even if it's just a couple of days, even if it's just a couple of weeks, right? And most of the time it's a couple of months because I'm also studying. Like I'm also doing a master's degree next to everything else I'm doing, and it's part time and it's remote and stuff, but it's still work.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of like, it's a lot. I wish I could draw more, but I'm fine not doing that, and I'm fine using that passion on something else on the side in my free time right now.
Yeah.
Because like also kind of like tying everything that I do for passion, like tying everything that I love doing into sort of like a revenue stream or a revenue source, and just seeing it like that is
Yeah.
also depressing as heck. And I also don't want to fall into that trap, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's my very long answer to
No,
that.
but actually, this is very interesting because I was thinking about this with a lot of people who are also like, they do this slash this slash this, and a lot of these are passions that they have. And there is sometimes this question I have, like, as to, does every passion have to be your profession? Does everything that you do have to be something that gives you money in some ways? I'm from
Yeah.
Detroit, and everybody, I would say, most people that I know there are like hustlers in some way. So like they always have like a side job. Their passion is another job, like
Yeah.
so they might work in the factories, they might work, in some actual day job, but in their spare time, what are they doing? They're musicians, they are artists, they are, singers, they are doing various kind of things, rappers and such. And that's a whole career. That's actually someone's actual job,
Yeah.
but it's a weird thing when your passion is also the thing that puts, the food on the table and such. It
Yeah.
has a whole different dynamic to it. Then you start looking at it from a different way. Like I see this from content creators all the time who are like, I started off making content for myself, but then when you want to do it for money, then it becomes a thing where you have to start thinking, how do you make this for those other people? And how do you make certain that you
Mm-hmm.
optimize these things and get that, get the message out, which may not have been
Yep.
the message you wanted to put out, but, it's that weird adjustment of, when you're doing something for yourself versus when you're doing something for others. Um,
Yep. Yep.
and it can take a lot of that, it can sap a lot of the joy out of it in some ways, if that's not what you
Yeah.
intended to do.
Yeah, imagine all the cool stuff that people would create and also collaborate on and build houses, roads, whatever infrastructure we need, take care of one another. If cost of living as a thing was not a thing, right? Like, is this the part where I plug the general idea of UBI? I don't know.
Universe.
Every single
Yeah.
conversation with me just like comes back to that. But
No,
it's just,
but seriously,
you
yeah,
know,
it's a thing. Well,
yeah.
it's interesting. So a lot of things that we want to make in the world require, some things require vision, some things require effort, and most things require both, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of the visions that we have need more people and more hands to execute than what
Yes.
we have, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it's a thing where in some companies you'll notice, you'll look at, sometimes there are people who are working there who are just working there for a paycheck, and that's fine, and they're just giving their labor, their skills, their hands, their talent, to
Yep.
help you get that dream done and such. But it doesn't have to be their dream. It doesn't really have to. Like, it's okay if they can do a great job and it's not their passion per se, but they can do a great job with it still.
Hmm.
And it doesn't always have to be where everybody, though. I think everybody doesn't have to be so emotionally invested in what they're doing. Um, that's a great privilege if that's where you are. But sometimes people just
Yep.
want the paycheck so that they can go and do the things that are the things that refill them emotionally and spiritually and socially and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be that
Yep.
it's all in one.
Yeah, and I would even add to that it can get very dangerous then when there are like multiple sides to this, right? Because especially within the startup space, but I mean big
Mm.
companies do this too. I'm sure I see the PR, I see the marketing, I know that they do it, but I don't really work for those companies, so I can mostly talk to the smaller ones, but there are like these like purpose driven or mission driven companies or what have you,
Mm.
um, and they will very often. I'm trying not to generalize, but I have seen this a lot, and I think that we have to be very careful with this, both as individuals who work for these companies, but also like as the people running these companies. We have to be very careful, because this kind of thing of like, oh, somebody is only here for the paycheck. Do we really want this person? I'm like, if that person is contributing with their skill and with their knowledge and with their labor, then yes, you want that person, right?
Yeah.
Like because that can very, very easily turn into this whole like emotional blackmail. And like
Absolutely.
I have seen that so often when like purpose driven companies or whatever, you know, like social impact companies, are like, you have to really care about this. You have to be really, really passionate about that. And I think that there is a lot of sense to what they are talking about, in the sense that, of course, like if we are working for XYZ social impact, then we do need the insight that comes from caring about that. Yes.
Yeah.
But or and maybe, I don't know, we will see what the right conjunction is when I reach the end of this sentence. But so the thing is that attitude can very easily turn into this policing of sort of like, oh, if you're not working overtime, then you don't care enough. You have to prove to me that you care enough. If you're not putting in extra time, effort, if you're not working for free, if you're not, or just like, if you're not okay with getting like a low paycheck for something, then you don't care enough. Then maybe you don't want to. And like, it becomes this constant of, you have to prove that you care enough about the mission or the purpose of the company or what have you. And that can get very dangerous very fast, because then it's not just going to impact that of like my perception of whether or not the employees here care enough about the thing, but it can also very easily turn into something that is really, really harmful to especially marginalized employees, because then it just suddenly becomes like, well, if you're not giving me, like, I mean, you know, if you are the only trans person on a team, right, and you are, let's say, a developer, your job is to write code. That's what you do. But then HR keeps coming to you. Well, if you're big enough to have HR, but you know what I mean. So like people keep coming to you and say like, so how do I use this pronoun? How do I do this thing? So give me, then you're essentially also performing DEI work, right? On the time, on the side that you don't get paid for. It takes time away from your actual duties. And so you're suddenly like the professional trans person at the company. And if you say no, and I'm sure that this goes for every other marginalized identity too, right? Like, let's be real. Then you're suddenly like the professional, marginalized person at your company, and then you have to like provide that knowledge, that insight, what have you, that you might not have. That's just, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have the skills or not. Actually, I'm just going to say that it doesn't matter if you have the skills, the knowledge, if you have that sort of like DEI capacity to do it. It's not in your job description. You don't get paid for it, and it takes time away from the actual job that you will get judged on. And
Absolutely,
then
I've definitely seen that happen.
Right? And when you say, no, I'm sorry, like this is not a part of my job, then suddenly it's like, oh, you don't care about the people like you. It becomes this emotional manipulation,
well,
and it's not on purpose.
Can I say, I really fundamentally dislike when DEI people, well-meaning folks, they, like, for instance, when they're building out the ERGs, right? And 9 times out of 10, you're not paying those people. And it takes so much time. And people are basically event organizing. They're doing a lot of internal communication type things. They're doing a lot of actual jobs, within things. And they're not getting compensated for it. And as a DEI leader, it's a really weird space where you try to, like, in some ways there's emotional coercion to try to get people to participate in these kind of things. And it's kind of funny because for me, I think those things ought to exist. I will encourage that, ERGs do exist. It's nice to be able to build out safe spaces where you can actually listen to and get feedback from different groups and this kind of thing that can help affect your policies and your practices and your ways of working and how you can support folks. Love that. Great. Don't expect everybody's going to join that. Do not expect that. Like, don't automatically try to put people into these things. Do not, that's not what everybody needs in their professional experience. It's not what everybody wants in their professional experience. I mean, I know.
And it's heavy.
It's heavy. It's
heavy emotional labor. It's very heavy emotional labor. You are asking people to volunteer that heavy emotional labor, and there will be people who feel very strongly about it and will be willing to, and maybe even do it with great enthusiasm, and that's amazing. You are very lucky. If you do not have the resources to pay them, then you make sure that you adjust any sort of performance or whatever that you are expecting of them accordingly.
Yeah.
So that they can do the ERG work within their working hours.
One thing
That's the minimum you can do.
One thing I did like, I was working with this one company where we ended up doing essentially having ERG work as being one of the things that you can look at as a criteria for leadership development. But there are certain things where people are looking to get promotions in the company. They're trying to build out how do they have their growth program. And there has to be, demonstrations of leadership. There has to be something where you're talking about, how have you done these things? And that was one of those things that you could use as evidence to be able to say, hey, look, I've done this, So that was one of those things that was, a prerequisite for promotion for certain areas and such, which is a great thing. You can take something like this and make that something that you can have a positive evaluation for as you do those feedbacks and things like this. If you can do that, if you can integrate that in, fantastic. There has to be some tangible benefit, because if you're just doing it for yourself, if you're just doing this for your company's name and your employer branding, etc., but not doing it in a way that concretely adds value to people who are participating in it, then that is performative. That is exactly what that means, So it has to be built in a way that it actually adds value to the people that you're intending to create value for. And you can't do that without thinking about how can you integrate the incentives for this? How can you, if you're not going to pay them, then you should probably pay them realistically, depending on like what level of participation they have. If you're not paying them, though, think about how can you help boost them in the way they're trying to grow, how they're trying to develop. How can this actually be something that's concretely going to improve their experience? And that's a thing that you have to look at. It's something where if you don't do that, then you are absolutely taking advantage of folks, and that's something that it should feel uncomfortable for people like us, and I hope it does, because it is not a good thing.
No, exactly, and it's so important to well, you cannot guarantee anybody's safety, right? And like having a safe space is also never a guarantee. You can strive to have it, but the thing is also with ERGs, you have to absolutely make sure that you build trust with those groups. You have to make sure that you protect the people who are in those groups, because I'm not an ERG expert. I don't have extensive experience with ERGs in any way. I don't it's not part of sort of like my professional offering either, because I do have opinions, but I don't have that expertise that would be like very helpful there. But I do feel very strongly about like these people are doing very, very heavy emotional labor, and you have to make sure that they are never coerced into doing it. You have to make sure that they have trust, that you have trust for them. You have to make sure that whatever they come up with, that it's actually listened to. And what you said, like it cannot be performative. It cannot but most of this work is like that. We cannot be performative, because ultimately it's not just that it's not going to have the impact that we hope it would. It can also cause harm. Like performative work within this space, it causes tangible harm. It destroys trust. It creates more workplace trauma, especially for marginalized people. Existing today in this economy, existing under capitalism, existing under all of the systems and structures that we exist under. And here's the thing, I maybe this is controversial or whatever, but like existing under white supremacy as well. Yes, as a white person, I definitely benefit from a lot of white supremacy, but it also is traumatizing to everybody to exist under white supremacy, because it is extremely dehumanizing to people of the global majority, to Black people, to brown people, to it's extremely traumatizing. I'm not comparing those experiences at all, but I think that it's very important for white people also to realize that white supremacy also has a dehumanization mechanic built in for us, and that we are put into this place to keep promoting and upholding this system that also doesn't really, like, yeah, we do benefit from certain things in it, but is it really worth it? Because ultimately, when I look at it, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I'm sorry, it's messed up. Like, the benefits are not all that great if we're being completely honest about it, because, like, existing under capitalism, which is, I'm sorry, it's inseparable from white supremacy and colonialism and coloniality as a concept, like, in my mind, and also historically, and also in many other people's minds. So it's not just an opinion, but, like, these things are very, very closely interlinked. They are interlinked systems. And the thing is that apart from, say, a handful of people, it is traumatizing to exist under capitalism for all of us. This constant scarcity, this constant insecurity, the material insecurity, the financial insecurity, the toxic workplaces. This is why, like a core part of the work that I'm trying to do is to imbue people with imagination. Like, please imagine better ways of working, right? Like, please dare to imagine something else than what we have today, because I promise you there are 150 ways out there that are better than what we have today. And some of those may be even possible in our current systems, like some of those we might even be able to implement. But this is like whatever we are doing today, we've been doing it for over 100 years, and it has not worked for anyone except for Elon Musk, maybe. But at this point, I'm also questioning that. So, like, come on.
I know, you can be king of, you can be king of the ashes if you like, but the fact is you need to burn the world down just to be able to feel, value. Here's the thing. I come from the States, right? And it's a very hard thing when I talk to my family and people back home and such about, the idea that maybe the system that we exist in over there is not the best system for people, because the idea is this whole feeling of getting ahead, it's so ingrained on us. Like, we have to get ahead. You got to work hard and you got to game the system. If you're really, really smart, you'll be able to find your ways out. And if you really thought about something in advance, you should have thought about this like before you were born. You would have been able to plan for this, prepare for this, and save up for this, and da da da. It's that level of, like, it's all your fault in that sense if you don't make it. And that's the perspective of things. And it's this weird thing where the goal is, like I said, to get ahead. But that means you're always thinking about what you're doing relative to other people. You're getting ahead of whom? Who are you getting ahead of? Who are you racing against in that sense? And as long as you have this idea that, for you to do better, you must be better than these people, or you have to always try to take yourself further and farther than what those other folks are to try to get higher up on that pyramid, then you're not going to change that system, because that's the thing that you're trying to win this game. This is constant belief that you can win this game, and this is gambling mentality, but you're gambling lives and livelihoods. You're gambling health, you're gambling safety, you're gambling so much. You're gambling, the things that you would actually value, which would be people. I think you should value human life. But you can't quite do that if the value of a human life is based off of what they produce. And you can't quite do that if the value of a human life, is in such a way that, it is something that we have to kind of rethink in some ways. Like, I was talking to someone about how we had this idea of addiction, where I grew up in Detroit, in the inner city. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a very big crack epidemic, and there was this thought that anybody who had, drug addiction, they were like throwaway people. They were not folks that you could ever save. They were not folks you could ever redeem. And it's just, if you make that choice in your life, then you have chosen to throw away your life, right? And it wasn't until I got older and I moved to a different country and I saw, well, actually, no, you can rehabilitate all kinds of people. People can be brought back from those things, you know, because it's just a matter of, are you going to put the energy and invest into that redemption process, that health process, getting them back, to where they can be themselves again. And I think because we didn't put that investment into people, we just basically said it's cheaper to throw them away, you know. And I had to do so much unlearning, just to
Mm,
understand that realistically, I had this capitalistic mentality when it comes to human life for a lot of
yeah.
things. And
Yes.
you have to really start unpacking the things that you believe, unpacking the systems that you've been raised in to be able to understand how you can change them. Because there has to be a better way, as you said. And I think until we can get people to understand that it's not a game you have to play, this is not, it's
Yeah.
rigged against you and it's rigged against
Yeah.
most people. Um, so can we find a better way of doing this? Because this is not something that any of us are actually going to win.
Yeah, yeah, I'm fully with you because the thing is also that I don't blame the individual people for that mentality. I
Mm,
don't blame the individual people for like wanting to get ahead because that's how we are brought up. That's what we are taught from
mm,
from birth, that you have to be better than others in order to get ahead. And obviously like for for groups of people who have been historically oppressed, um,
mm,
that becomes something where you're like, this is something that I have at least an illusion of control over. And I don't blame anybody who buys into that, right? Because
mm,
it's just such, like, there is such an existential threat to people in general,
yeah.
that everybody is feeling. And that's why we have a hard time also like standing united, because we're like, but I suffer too. And so that's everybody's sort of like reaction. And also like people who we call privileged, which because they are, because we are privileged in like many ways and then not privileged
Mm,
in other ways. But when you call, like, say, uh, 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 a person who has been struggling all their life,
mm,
right? Sort of like privilege, that's never going to resonate with them, because it's like, I've been
yeah.
struggling all my life. I've been homeless. I've been this, I've been that. I have this chronic illness. I have, what have you, right? So it's the thing is that to me, it's just really, really this insecurity and this scarcity that is just so deeply ingrained in us, that this scarcity thing, it's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It's not
Mm,
a material thing that exists around us. It is something in our mind, in our psychology, in our bodies. Our bodies can feel the scarcity. It's our way of existing. And I think that this insecurity, it causes most of our problems. It
mm,
causes at least so much. It causes
mm,
so much. It prevents us from working together, because obviously this whole like getting ahead of others is incompatible with building together. And
mm,
so our building together bits become very conditional, and they become very existing like in a bubble.
yeah.
And it becomes very temporary. we
Mm,
we cannot see building together and collaborating and coexisting and stuff like that as a permanent state of being, because
mm,
that's a bubble that can just like burst anytime. Like, we had the luxury to work together for this short amount of time, but when will this end? Because that insecurity, that scarcity that exists, it
mm.
exists in us, it exists around us, and some of us are more lucky in that regard than others. But again, like, I don't blame the individuals. Like,
No, no.
generations upon generations upon generations, like, these systems are so old and they're so deep, but we do have to change like both the way that we think in some way, and the
Mm.
systems that promote that thinking. Like, we cannot just do one or the other. I don't think
No,
it's,
I
yeah.
think, but scarcity is one of those things. It's a manifestation of fear. That scarcity mentality. It's a manifestation of fear, right? And people, we oftentimes are guided by fear. Probably it's one of the main drivers of our behavior is what are we afraid of? That determines what we're going to be open to, it determines what we're going to run away from, it determines so much of our behavior. But fear has a place. Fear does keep you alive to a certain degree, but it won't help you
Exactly.
live. It won't help you
No.
live. Okay. So I think, and so I'm never going to fault the person from thinking of from a place of fear if that's where they are, you know. But the reality is most people don't reevaluate where they are to understand if what they're afraid of is something that they need to still be afraid of, if what they're afraid of ever made sense to be afraid of. They're not going to be able to think about, you know, what are the realities and the opportunities of where they are. So I think one thing I would love to see people to kind of get back to is shifting from thinking from a fear mentality to a hope mentality if you possibly can. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what's something
Mm-hmm.
to not just run from in your life, the interactions, the people, the connections,
Yeah.
those kind of things to run from. What's something you want to run towards? You know, what is it
Yeah.
that you're hoping towards or working for? Because if you find that this is what your goals are, these are the things that you want to build, this is what you want to create in this world, and you realize other people are trying to get to that point too, that opens up the opportunity for collaboration. That opens up the opportunities for
Yeah.
be able to work together with more people and to be able to create more
Yeah.
change. But as long as you think from a fear idea, this fear concept, you know, and that's going to give you this whole scarcity mindset, you're not going to ever get to that point. You're never going to run towards or reach that place that you're going to feel comfortable, you're going to feel safe, you're going to be, you know, and create what you want in this world. So you're going to have to at some point make that mental shift and think about what is that hope that you're going to go towards, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's hard to reach it with anybody else if you don't even know where you're going.
Yeah, that's also what I mean by like imagination. Like
Yeah.
let's go back to imagination. Let's really that was something that I actually did make a short comic about this one at the very beginning of my own
Oh,
journey where
I
I
want
was
to
like,
see this.
I will share it. But I did
Mm-hmm.
because I went so right before I started this whole self-employment thing that was very scary. I went on a walk. I went on this walk and I took off my shoes and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna walk around like barefoot, like I did when I was a kid, and I was not afraid of anything because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have so many bad experiences yet. Because that is also a huge luxury and privilege to have as a child. Because today there are children all around the world who are dying / are being murdered in order for us to have the electronics upon which we are having this conversation. And I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
such a central part of things too, that that when we say collaboration, it does mean our neighborhoods, it does mean our regions, it does mean online, it does mean a lot of different collaborations, but it has to also mean to want a
Mm-hmm.
future of dignity and safety for everybody around the world. And if that means that you will not get a new iPhone every 2 years, then that's what it means.
Yeah.
Period. Right. But then we have to be able to, and this is where I come back to imagination. We have to be able to imagine what else can exist out there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not just going to be one thing, it's going to be a million different things. And then the next step is we have to work together to make those million things. There will be as many futures imagined as many people there are. We have to then work together to make those things compatible with one another.
Yeah.
And some of it will be compromises, and some of it will be negotiations, and some of them will be, oh, hey, these things that seem so incompatible on the surface are not incompatible at all. See trans rights and women's rights. Some people are like convinced that those two things are completely incompatible. And I'm like, but they are not, because the more transphobia or anti-trans bigotry or what have you, like the more anti-transness exists in the world, the worse it is for women too, cisgender women. Like, let's be honest about this part here. Like,
Mm-hmm.
gender equality is not closing the pay gap between women and men. Gender equality is gender liberation. It is not about creating gender segregated space of like, oh, this is for women only or whatever, because yes, sometimes that is very necessary depending on the context, but we have to be intentional about that and say, is it necessary in this context? If we say yes, then absolutely go for it. Then have a clear idea of why, what purpose that serves, and how you are going to make it happen without policing and without enforcement, right? So that people understand the sense behind it and say, yeah, okay, cool. So instead of like this whole gender segregation idea, just like, like liberation. It's about liberation. But yeah, anyway, I'm very passionate
So
about this part. It
no,
has to mean
I can
everybody.
tell. I can tell. One thing I want to add to that, because you're inviting people to kind of consider some things in this. When you were saying about liberation, and it can't be something that is policed or enforced or this kind of thing. It has to be, something that we've all agreed on. I would definitely want to make certain that we keep in mind that human rights, are not something that need to exist by consensus. Okay.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
I do want to add in the fact that no, we do have to enforce some things, and it's not something that I would say it can just be because the majority doesn't feel like it right now. It shouldn't exist. That's not. I don't want
Yeah,
to ever do that, because I think about the
yeah.
rights that I have as a person of color. They didn't exist because people decided at some point,
100%.
you know,
Yes.
it's the right thing. Some people in some office decided to sign some documents, and they have some regulatory and procedure and protocol processes to help enforce those things, and that's how, yay, I got freedom. It's literally
Yeah.
not about sometimes consensus on these things, and you
No,
should never
no.
say the life of a person is something that we all have to agree on to have value. I mean, so yes, I definitely I understand where you're coming from,
Yeah.
but I would say we have to make certain that realistically, good things don't happen just because we agreed on it once and we said, sounds like a nice idea. You have to have processes, you have to have protocol, you have to have safeguards, you have to have that
Yes.
enforcement of things for them to actually stick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
This is an extremely good point, and thank you so much for for clarifying on that, because I 100% agree. And I also see how what I said definitely translated into that. What I was thinking, I do just want to say that what I was thinking about when I said the whole minus policing thing was, this is it. This is exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because then your imagined future comes together with my imagined future. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, there is something for me to tweak here. It's the
Yeah.
process, because it's true, and I fully agree with you. I do very, very strongly seeing. Also, again, I'm not drawing parallels here. It's just my own experience, seeing what is happening politically regarding transgender people in the world today. That is really scary. That is super scary to me, because that is people are debating my right to exist straight up, and it's not, and they code it in certain language. They're like, oh, we're protecting the children, and I'm like, yeah, that's what you said in the 80s when you were persecuting gay people too. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
We've
it's
seen this
kind of
before,
weird
right?
because they said they're protecting the children, but what about the trans children? Somehow they don't count
trans
as kids.
trans children don't exist. That's
Yeah.
that's a core tenet of their philosophy too. Trans people don't
Ah.
exist. Trans children don't exist. Period. Squared, what have you. So I fully agree with you. No, liberation does not come by consensus. Yes, 100% with you there. It's true. It's true. We there is a lot of work to be done, and the thing is that no, I'm not going to wait for people to agree that trans people have the right to exist for me to feel like I have the right to exist. I will argue that point. I will definitely go forward and argue that point, that no, actually what you're saying is factually incorrect. What I mean by policing is, when I was thinking about specifically about gender segregated spaces, that I call them now sometimes, is that this whole, this space is only for cisgender women. And the reason why I said that there needs to be more understanding and less policing, because enforcing and policing are also not the same thing. So yeah, my use of enforcement was probably bad, but without policing, is because, for example, in shelters, right? In shelters for that are for women who are, say, trying to escape sexual abuse or any sort of abuse like that. There are shelters who are, for all women, meaning, cisgender women, transgender women, anybody who identifies with that womanhood, anybody who needs access to that space. But then we have certain, trans exclusionary, I'm not going to call them feminists because they're not, trans exclusionary people who say, no, women's shelters should be for cisgender women only. And so I'm like, if you want to create that space, so that's the bit that I meant, that if you want to create that space, there needs to be understanding why. And that cannot come at the cost of somebody else's right to live and survive. Because because then their logic is that like, oh, trans women are men. I'm sorry, that's just what they think, right? And it's just not true. And we know that trans women are disproportionately affected by the kind of abuse that these shelters support women through. So what is your logic there? Then I need to understand what your logic is, and I don't. Like, not just me, because like also I'm a trans man, so it's like it doesn't like affect me that much. Arguably, not gonna get into that. But the thing is, like that's what I mean by policing. Like, if we are creating those like segregationist spaces for like cisgender women or what have you, but so my argument here definitely can be seen as hypocritical, because then, you know, like when you create trans only spaces, then cis people can say like, what do you mean? I have to understand why this exists. So that's why it's like a double-edged sword. So that I see exactly where your point came in there.
I'm very pragmatic. So when it comes down to it, it's the same feeling I have about collecting data as it is when I think about like, you know, what are you doing with it in that sense? It has to make sense for the people that you're trying to serve, right?
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, there are some cases where I wish there was more, when I say intentionality, about the segments that we're trying to get to. Like, for instance, when we talk about like women's issues, well, which women are you talking about? Like, there are very different realities there. And I think, honestly, we could do with a bit more, you know, fine-grained approaches if we're trying to serve different groups in there, you know?
Exactly.
So I'm not a person that will ever say like, don't look at segmentation. I think it's absolutely going to be relevant for experiences. And, you know, I can see where there are cases where for most things you could say, okay, if we're trying to target this group and we need to make sure we're trying to serve this group, that, you know, you have to look at the segmentations within it. Otherwise you're not going to reach the people that you're trying to reach. So I do want to kind of put that back out there because, like you said, it's a double-edged sword when you're talking about these kind of things of like segmentations versus not. Because oftentimes, if you don't look at things intentionally, as you're saying, you have to be able to justify. If you don't look at things intentionally, you're going to reach and serve a certain group that's oftentimes the most privileged within it, and only that group. You know. So, you know, I would like to see that there were more spaces that were catering to different groups, more specifically if you're going to try to reach other groups, or more intentionality in terms of when you're planning. You have a broad group. If you're going to say all kinds of gender minority groups, you know, or minoritized genders, to put it in a better way, then you would need to look within those groups, understand what the realities are for those. I oftentimes get like, do you ever hear this? Like sometimes when people are grouping together, they'll group together women and non-binary people, right? As if non-binary people are like women light, you know? Do you ever get that? Like, and I always kind of bristle at that. And it's not to say that I don't think we should include non-binary people or agender people or things like this. But I when you look at the data and you look at how things are happening and what the experiences are, very seldom are they actually going to be identical experiences, you know, very different kind of things. I think that if you're really trying to serve those communities, oftentimes it makes more sense to separate that if you're trying to serve those different groups. So I feel you on that. But I think it comes down to what the purpose is, what you're trying to accomplish.
That's
and,
exactly
you know, so I think it comes down to what you're trying to accomplish. It is, everybody should be supported. But the question is, how do we do that in a way that actually does that, as opposed to just does it in name only, you know?
Exactly. And I think that you said the key word there. It's intentionality. Like, you have to be intentional about it. You have to understand what you're saying. And I think that a lot of the times when people say women and non-binary people, they don't understand what that means. Because that also like on the one hand, it's the issue is exactly what you also highlighted, is that a lot of those experiences are not going to overlap, and that like exactly we will end up serving the most privileged within the group, which is like, you know, like women's issues is for white cisgender women. Like, let's be very real about that. It's like that's when people say women's equality or women's issues or whatever. That's when this thinking stops.
They're a valid group, and they definitely, you know,
they are a valid
we
group.
have other groups. You know,
exactly. And then when those other groups speak up and say, hey, how about us? Then the privileged group whose perception is like, oh, but we have made so much progress. And like, we didn't leave you behind. And I was like, you kind of did. But, anyway, so back to the women and non-binary thing. So that is one thing, right? Like first
Yeah.
of all, there is like not this understanding, not this intentionality that I love that word. And I at some point I was like my big aha moment, it happened like 2-3 months ago. I don't know. Where I was like, oh, what is the difference between intentionality and control? And that is one question, journaling question, and just thinking about question that I come back to every month. I wrote that down somewhere where I'm like, what is the difference between intentionality and control? And whatever issue I'm facing, the answer is usually in that. So anyway, again, another tangent. I even took my meds today. Why am I being like this? But so the thing is, coming back to women and non-binary people, it also straight up, like it just solidifies this idea that, oh, non-binary people are women light, exactly as you said. And then the other thing is, who is going to be excluded from those spaces if it's a physical space? Well, anybody who looks like what we think of when we think man. So say non-binary people who, okay, I'm not a fan of this, but I will say it for the sake of clarity, whatever, right? Who were assigned male at birth, and like, for all intents and purposes, look like a man, they will not be welcome in that space. I'm sorry, they will not, even though they do 100% fall under the umbrella women and non-binary people. But because for people it's like, oh, it's women and women light, or women and women who have a very complicated relationship to being woman or whatever, like it just like really like does this thing to your thinking. And then what about non-binary people who look like men? What about them? Are they welcome in that space? That's a big question for me too, right? And then it becomes like this whole, I hate it's like related to this point is like the testosterone fueled blah blah blah. I have never been happier and gentler in my life than when I started testosterone, because finally I was happy. That's it. Like it's not testosterone's fault. Everybody has testosterone in their body, unless in rare cases they don't, but like it doesn't matter what your gender, what your biological sex. I'm not gonna get that, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Everybody has testosterone. It's not a male hormone. Everybody has testosterone. It's just that the balance, same with estrogen, same with all of these things, it's just that the balance looks different depending on the individual and the story. So here's the thing, like what I'm saying is like the whole like, oh, it's a testosterone driven whatever, to describe toxicity. That is so damaging. The whole like, this is a sausage fest to describe toxicity, to describe having too many men in a room. All of these things, they are the other side of the whole women and non-binary people coin to me. It's still all about vilifying masculinity and equating masculinity to toxic masculinity, equating men to the patriarchy. And I don't want to go all hashtag not all men, because I have a vested interest in this, but so I'm not going to do that, right? But the whole thing is
I
that
can say
like,
it for you. Okay, not all men. All right, but there you go.
And here's the thing though, that like hashtag not all men, but hashtag yes all patriarchy, period.
Yo,
those two
seriously.
things exist together.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I too have to examine my part in the patriarchy now that I have a beard. And so like, like it is a very complex and complicated relationship. And it's not about hashtag not all men. It's really not about that. But what it is about is that it does harm people. It harms everybody. Like this whole equating masculinity with toxic masculinity, equating men with the patriarchy, that harms all of us. It harms all of us. It harms non-binary people. It harms women. It harms men. It harms anybody, everybody. It harms racially marginalized people. Like, come on, like gender as a concept, it has been historically experienced extremely differently based on all sorts of things, including your skin color. Like this whole like men, when we say, oh, men are evil, men are the devil, I'm like, okay, but who are you thinking about? Are you thinking about racially marginalized men here? Because God knows that historically, and within like a US American and just generally a Western context, white cisgender women hold historical and extremely real power, dangerous power, over Black men. So what are we talking about when we equate all men? And this is just not about being trans. This is about everything. We have created this idea of men and women in such a white supremacist bubble that we, in our everyday language, we forget about the fact that, forget trans people for a moment. Gender is not like when we talk about, when women entered the workplace within the US American context, when women entered the workplace after the Second World War, and I'm like,
when were they not there? Like, it's always a thing. Like, my family's
black
always
women have been in the workplace for many, many decades before that. What are you talking about? And this is what I say, that like when people say women, they mean cisgender white women, because it's like we talk about women entering the workplace, the gender, and I'm like, okay, but again, you're not thinking about most women though, in general, but across honest, the world.
In many ways, this is kind of the reason why I've always had a weird relationship with gender. So a thing for me that I noticed, like when I was growing up, I grew up in a place that was a racially segregated area. I grew up in Detroit. And so I went to school out in the suburbs, which are very, very white, you know? And their concepts of gender were so very, very different from the concepts that I grew up with. So the expectations of what a girl should be in the concept of, a middle class, white suburban thing, was very different from what the values and expectations would be for a girl in a concept of like in the actual inner city. So, you're not going to be soft, like that softness and, that whole useless kind of, frailty and all that kind of stuff, really weird vibe, that I would get. And those are things I didn't ever identify with, because it was a very socially constructed version of gender that didn't apply to where I was from, And so these are always things where I look at like these things as being such social constructs, because I know like there are different expectations that you have when you have that label. And I don't like to put the label on until I know what the expectations are for you, like these are kind of a weird thing, So it's a very weird space in that sense, but there are always layers to it. There's always culture to it. There's always a sense of, context for which these things exist in. And that context is such a mental thing. It's such a, personal thing for a lot of people. And they cannot understand that someone else's context, someone else's world is going to be different from the one that they've envisioned in their head. And it's the strangest thing when you realize that you're interacting with 1,000 people or billions of people in their own little, mental bubbles of perception of how things are. And it's a miracle upon miracles that we can actually interact and collaborate and make things happen when we have such very different views and perceptions of how the world actually is and how people fit within it. But that's our challenge. That's absolutely our challenge. When we talk about inclusion, it's absolutely our challenge. We talk about diversity, to somehow make it work where all these different perceptions and all these different views of reality somehow get to coexist in a way that we can all be safe and valued, and we can all have the basic human respect and dignity that we all deserve, And I think that's a thing I would love to see, That's my goal. That's my professional goal. That's my personal hope, that we can find some way of transcending the bubbles that we exist in our minds, in our cultures and our societies, to be able to figure some way out of being able to work together better,
Yeah, and humanize one another. It's like one of the big things for me that I also keep reminding myself of is also when I read recounts of like extremely anti-trans people, right? Like I come back to the trans thing because that's like sort of the thing that I engage with a lot, also like in my free time. But even then, like I want to understand. I don't think everybody should like this is a very hard mental exercise and stuff like that when you're trying to like really understand where the other person comes from, who wishes that you didn't exist. And I don't think it's for everybody, nor should it be. Everybody, please protect your peace. But the thing is that like I am learning right now in very, very hard lessons that understanding and agreeing are two very, very separate things. I can allow myself to understand where somebody comes from, even if I fundamentally disagree with them and feel profoundly unsafe within their bubble, because I know that they think I should not exist in that bubble. And so that those things coexist. For me, I want to, not always, I don't always want to understand. Sometimes I'm like, I've had it, sometimes I don't want to understand. But then I will recognize it and then I will step a heck away. But sometimes when I have that bandwidth by some miracle, I do want to understand, and I do want to like have compassion for that thing. I understand when a parent is very, very worried about massive changes that their child is going through because they are finally figuring out who they are, and they might revert back to whatever the heck that was before, like 3 years ago, but it's still not a harmful thing. But the thing is that like everybody should have gender exploration. Doesn't matter if they're cis or trans or non-binary or what have you, anything else, anything in between or outside, doesn't matter. They should, like everybody should actually have conscious concepts about their gender, because they will be so much more happy, because gender is just like, much like capitalism and white supremacy and what have you, is an inherently traumatizing thing.
I'm going to take it a step back. I'm going to say beyond gender. I mean, I'm going to take it to the fact that, examine the boxes that you've been put in and consider what actually fits who you are as a person. I think just beyond any kind of labeling of this and such, just consider who you are and become more in touch with that and understand the person that you want to be in this world. Dignify that, respect that, support that, grow that. I think that's a thing. And, there are going to be perceptions and there are going to be labels and things like this that will be put upon a person. That is the world that we exist in. But understand who you are, understand what you have, to give in this world, understand, what you need to thrive in this world, and seek those things out, because realistically, there's never going to be a box, a label, a term, or, any kind of category that's ever going to encapsulate who you are as a person. So the most important thing is to figure out who you are as a person and find the thing that's going to fit you, because the world can't give you everything. So it's going to be important to make certain that you can give something to yourself,
You're stuck with yourself, right? Like that's the one person that you will be stuck with for your entire life.
My goodness.
That's it.
Lord.
That's it.
But,
I know. It comes back to me, humanize yourself. And that is exactly what you're saying. Examine those boxes and whether or not you really want to stay in them, because maybe you don't. So humanize yourself so that you can humanize everybody else as well.
I love this. Perfect.
Yeah.
So I realize I do have to let you go. I've taken up so much of your life today.
I have taken up so much of your time.
But actually, one quick thing I've been asking people, especially as we're approaching the autumn time, is if there is something that is going to give you hope and light on these dark gray days, what's the thing that gives that to you? And what do you think you can give to somebody else in that sense?
That is such a huge question. To me right now, connections. I probably full on stole this one with you because we have had this conversation before. But I realized that is the thing that keeps me anchored, right? Like it's connection to other people. It's connection to the things that bring me joy right now. What brings me joy is that I finally started working on the comic project, on like this graphic novel project that I had been writing for many years, and now I'm like, okay, you know what, it's fine. It's scary that it now exists, like a couple of pages of it exist in the world, but I will work on this and it brings me joy. And so just like that sort of connection to like doing things, going to orchestra. Love going to orchestra, because those are people ask me how do you find the time, how do you find the time to go to orchestra? And I'm like, no, the luxury for me is not going to orchestra. The luxury for me is not going, because when I am there, I have 2.5 hours where I am forced to think about the music that I'm playing, and I cannot think about work.
I
and
don't
if
even know
you
what
can
you play,
find
by the way.
Violin. I try.
Okay, very cool.
I try. But yeah, so that, I think that would be the one big thing, is like, if there is anything that can be your me time, identify that with joy, and do something creative, because you deserve it. Everybody deserves doing something creative. I'm not going to get into another thing, but here's the thing. creating art, be it music, be it dancing, I'm very bad at like, I hate saying this actually. I'm having like a visceral reaction to this. I'm not bad at dancing. I'm not a professional dancer, right? I'm not a professional dancer, and I'm nervous to dance in front of other people because, but I'm not bad at dancing. What does it mean to be bad at dancing? I just move my body to the music. So sometimes I just move my body to the music when nobody else sees me because it brings me joy, because it moves things. And
Yay.
like I wouldn't dance in front of people. I'm not a professional dancer by any means, but it brings me joy. So I cannot be bad at it, right?
I hope
Same
you
for
know that
drawing.
I'm going to actually, next time we run into each other, if there is music involved, I'm going to say, hey, do you want to dance and such? And that would bring me joy as well. So like, I'm just saying, you got to get
I
over that whole
might.
fear of showing that to people. It's going to
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
I'm going to look very ridiculous, but maybe at that point, I would be at the point where I just don't care anymore. And I would just care for the joy that it brings us in that moment, in that connecting moment of
There you
moving
go.
our bodies to music. Same for drawing, same for singing. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care how many off-key notes, like, I don't care. There is no
Mm-hmm.
such thing as being bad at art. You can be like like not a professional artist or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
like you cannot be bad at it. If it brings you joy, do it. That's it. You know what? That's it. Do a creative thing. You cannot be bad at it, period.
I
That's
love that. I love that.
it.
And you absolutely did, take some of those things from me. I'm very happy you never take it, you borrow, and you're using this. Connection's a great thing. I love connection,
Yeah.
and you've given me joy
Yeah.
today because whenever I get to learn from people like you, I get to talk to folks like you, I get to hear and be inspired by you. That's something that makes, that creates light, that creates joy, that creates,
Mm.
something to look forward to in my week, which is why I have this whole series with all these different people I get to chat with and such, because hopefully it gets to bring some kind of joy and light to other people's weeks as well. But I hope that people do go out and they look for the things that give them purpose, that give them peace, that give them that moment of just levy the smile that you need in your day. People sometimes, I don't want to go into the whole sexist thing of like, smile and such, that kind of thing. You don't owe anybody a smile, but it can certainly benefit you if you give one. If it's a thing that if you can, even just for yourself, find something that gives you
Yeah.
that. And that makes your workday a little bit better. It makes, the hard times not quite as heavy. So yeah, thank you for being
Yeah.
in my day and making this day better. I appreciate it.
Thank you to you, Laura. I really appreciate it also.
Well, we'll see each other around, I'm certain.
Yeah.
But in any case, someday collaboration is going to happen, I assure you.
I can see
But
it. I can sense it. It's around the corner. We will. Yes.
we're gonna make something happen. We're gonna make something happen. But in the meantime, good luck with all your work trying to make the world better, because I know you're gonna do it just by being you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Same to you.
Take
Thanks.
care. Bye.
Bye.